got a story for you. I know you won't believe a damn word of it. Honestly, if someone else told me this, I would most likely raise an eyebrow too. But listen, I spent most of my adult life hiking, camping, living out in the sticks whenever I could. Backwoods, solo treks, going to remote places that don't even show up on half the map. That was my thing. I wasn't just your average weekend warrior. So yeah, I would consider myself a bit of an expert. But after this one trip, let me just say that I picked up some other hobbies. Gardening. Anything that doesn't involve being alone in the middle of nowhere. So this one time I drove out to one of my backwoods spots that I like to go camping at, and 3 hours into a 5-hour hike before I reached the camping spot. It's a nice day. There's nothing but fresh air, clear skies, and some animal noises in the distance. At this point, I'm getting that oneness feel with nature. You hear people talk about it, especially from people who camp solo or live off the grid. Every bird call, every branch breaking, it makes you feel part of nature. When you felt it, you know exactly what I mean. It's very peaceful. All of a sudden, it's interrupted by a noise. I hear some noise up a hill off the path that I was going. It's a dude, and he's stumbling down the hill. Not to mention he's walking super funny, almost like a puppet on strings. He looks very weird too. My memory kicks in. There were no other cars parked in the offshoot that leads to the forest trail that I'm on. We are in the middle of nowhere, and there's nothing for hundreds of miles the direction he came from. It's just forest. That's when he begins to laugh and says, "Hello there." He keeps calling out to me. That's when I unholster my gun. Why? Well, look, I may love the woods, but I'm not fucking stupid. A man popping out of the trees in the middle of fucking nowhere, laughing and calling out like we're long-lost buddies. That ain't normal. I learned about when something feels wrong, you better trust your gut. And at this point my gut was screaming. Too many scary stories started with ignoring your instincts. And I sure wasn't going to be one of them. So the dude is stumbling on the trail, and damn right, I racked the slide of my gun. He then waves at me and he walks towards me on the trail. I then say, "That's close enough." But this dude is completely unfazed. At this point, I'm pointing my gun at him and he just keeps laughing and waving his arm. He's got a weird-ass gait to his walk to, but his body doesn't move right. Almost like puppet strings were moving him. It was creepy. I heard many stories about things in the woods. Not from random people. I'm referring to stories from the old-timers, the locals who lived out here their whole life. People talk about spirits, forest things that wear your skin like a mask, things that don't bleed, don't break, and definitely don't come from any town you ever heard of. Some of it you chalk up to superstition, but the way they tell it, it will make you believe them, especially because they have no reason to lie. And the second that I saw this man's walk, there was something inside of me that knew that this might be one of those stories walking straight towards me. Fuck this. I then shout, "That's enough. I will shoot you. I'm not fucking around." I think that if there was any semblance of sanity in this person, then they would leave. But this guy keeps wiggling, walking towards me. Yes, wiggle walking. Imagine being in the middle of fucking nowhere, and you see this guy wiggle walking towards you. And mind you, this is after I pointed my gun at him. At this point I can discern his facial features and he looks kinda normal. If it wasn't for that extremely weird fucking walk he was doing, I most likely would have just let him come closer. Not to mention he was wearing a light sweater and jeans. He looked like a normal person from a distance. The dude is like 10 meters away and he continues with the laugh and the weird conversation starters. He then shouts, "It's nice to meet you." Fuck it. At this point, not about to become a victim or something out here. I'm not going to be a name someone brings up in a missing persons thread or one of those headlines like, "Solo camper disappears without a trace." Nah. If something is going to come at me in the woods, I'm going to make sure it remembers my fucking name too. So, I end up firing my gun. I dump 5 or 6 rounds into this guy. I'll stop for a moment because he stops walking after those shots. I believe I did hit him, but there's no blood. But he didn't scream or do anything. He just stood there. Then, he falls. I can see him. From the distance I see that, he falls into an awkward position. You know how in demonic movies they show someone possessed all with their limbs in different angles? Well, that was basically him. Like his joints and bones aren't connected right. Almost like someone put a human together without knowing how the skeleton works. And then, I swear, he contorted or something and he crawled away, disappearing onto the underbrush. I think I was in state of shock that I didn't even use my gun anymore. I didn't hear this rapid hitter-patter of, I guess, steps that gradually fade into the woods, twigs and branches snapping as whoever, or whatever this thing is, goes further away. I knelt out of there so down fast, it was already 2.3, and by 4.3 it was going to be getting dark in the forest, or darker than I would feel comfortable being alone with whoever or whatever is out here. I'm not kidding when I sat down on the spot there. I ended up dumping my tent, my sleeping bag, and everything else. I was fine with just leaving there, simply because I needed to turn a 3-hour hike into an hour-and-a-half hike, or possibly less, and get the fuck out of here. There was no way I was going to get caught up in the forest after dark with whatever this thing was, walking up to me at night. With the essentials on me, I double-timed it back the way that I came. Lucky for me, it was mostly downhill, so I wasn't fighting gravity like when I came up. I took care not to turn around, also not to run too fast. If I twisted my ankle or fell and hurt myself, I know that I would be screwed if that thing was creeping around. I believe I was almost done with the trail when I slowed down for a second to catch my breath. I knew I had to keep moving, but my legs were starting to burn and my chest was feeling tight. But when I stopped for like 10 seconds, that's when I hear it. The sound of something skittering, not walking, not running. Almost like somebody was crawling on the ground, long fingers dragging across dead leaves and bark, and also very fast. I didn't move. It came from behind me, maybe 20 feet back. The same damn direction that I just came from. But I didn't turn around. I knew it was him. Whatever this thing was, it was laughing in that broken voice. And then I also heard it speak again. Nice to meet you, but this time it sounded a little bit softer, drawn out, mocking, and also very close to me. I turned around. Nothing was there, so I booked it. Legs burning, adrenaline pumping like I was being chased by hell itself. At 3.45, the sun was already starting to not show through the woods as much. A slight panic had started to get into me, but I tried my best to remain calm and just keep with my brisk pace. I ended up getting back to my car at 420. I looked back into the forest, and apparently my eyes had adjusted to it because it was dark. 20 meters back into the shadows, I got in my car and I got the fuck out of there. I don't know if that thing is still out there, but I don't even go camping anymore, and I'm for sure not going back there for my tent or anything else. It's not worth it. About 2 years later, I ended up leaving Alaska. I still have some friends who live up there. If you wanted to go there, you may have to recruit a guide. Speaking of guides, a local native had told me a while back when I was scouting the location some 5 years ago to be mindful of the waterways north of the bridge. Maybe the old guy just liked telling ghost stories, but basically he talked about the spirits in the forest, people who ended up disappearing, who venture off in that same direction, that for my safety, I should stay on the south side of the ridge and avoid those creeks and that waterway to the north if at all possible. I always thought he meant like bears and moose up there, but I never venture onto that side of the ridge, so I never peeked around to find out. Maybe at some point I ended up going too far north, and I ended up angering the spirits. Not sure. But after seeing that thing up there, I didn't really feel the same. The forest itself doesn't feel the same, and I couldn't enjoy them like I used to. So if you ever go to some camping ground or hiking trail into a forest, always be careful. You just might see somebody crawling around. My friend and I were at a party on the Hopi reservation in Palaka. It was getting late, and we had a pretty good buzz on. Most of the people we knew had already trickled out, so we decided it was a good time, as any, to leave. We looked around for the friend who was supposed to give us a ride because we had all come together. We found him in a back bedroom, drunk and passed out. So we had no choice. We're going to have to walk. The two of us lived on the other side of the gorge, a good 2 miles. Between were nothing but trees, scrubs, brushes, and some hills. We had barely cleared the houses onto the road passing between the wooded area. When we got this funny feeling, we were being watched. We decided to leave the road and cut through the trees. It wasn't the easiest walk, but it would cut the distance down some. And even though it was pitch black outside, we knew the way pretty well. We had been a good 20 minutes off the road and heading up towards the hills when that same feeling of being watched came upon us again. We both turned around at the same time, but it was so dark we couldn't see anything. But then my friend Paul swore he heard some kind of cackling or mumbling. I didn't hear anything except for maybe the wind and the top of the trees at our back. By that time, none of us was going to admit it. We were feeling a little scared. Without saying a single word, we picked up the pace, moving along pretty good but not running, and that's when I heard it too. But now, it was more like heavy breathing. Paul then grabbed my arm and gave me a tug forward. We took off running straight up the hill, which wasn't that big, but it was still enough of a slope so I wasn't feeling it in my legs. And on top of that, I was drunk. Think about this for a second. Running up a hill at night, drunk, complete darkness. And as you're running, you hear footsteps behind me and heavy breathing. Whatever it was, though, stayed with us every step of the way. Right at the top, Paul and I stopped and turned around, expecting the thing to be right on us. But we were standing there, huffing and puffing and looking at nothing but darkness. A few seconds passed, and then we heard a thin laughter, as if it was coming from down the hill and back from where we started running. We decided to keep moving and put some distance between us. We turned to go down the other side of the hill, and there, standing right in front of us, was this creature. It was standing up on two legs like a circus dog, only much taller, with both paws extended out in front of it. It had this coyote face, and it was grinning at us, all of its teeth exposed and its tongue sliding from one side to the other. I couldn't believe how skinny it was, as if it hadn't eaten in weeks. Its rounded stomach sticking out like one of those African kids in the charity ads, and the skin sinking between its ribs. The smell was unbelievably bad, like the smell of an old wet dog. We both jumped back with a scream, like two little schoolgirls. As we did, the creature dropped down on all fours and ran past us, and down the hill back where we had come from. It was yipping and laughing all the way. Paul and I started praying like never before, swearing at Jesus that if he got us home safe, we would never drink again. The laughing, or whatever you want to call it, died down and disappeared. Wasting no time, the two of us made our way down that hill and into the trees that separated us from where we live. As we walked along, we were trying to convince each other everything was okay. It was only a coyote out searching for a meal. We scared it. It jumped up at us and then it ran away. We started feeling better about things overall. We got across the open field and into the trees. We made it all the way through there without anything else happening. However, just as we stepped out towards that first backyard that we needed a cut through to get to the street, we heard this unmistakable chatter like some little monkey laughing coming out of the trees just behind us. It was followed by the sound of something moving through the branches and twigs. My friend Paul then yelled out some words that he said that his grandmother had taught him. And just like that, the noise ceased and it got real quiet. He then grabbed my arm again, and we ran. We ran as fast as we could through that yard and out to the road. We ran straight for the house where Paul lives with his grandmother. When we got there, we found her awake and sitting in the kitchen with only a small candle for light. She was burning some cedar. When she saw us, she put her finger up to her lips and then pointed to the outside of the house. Her lips were moving, but silently. We stood there still for a minute or two, and then she spoke out loud saying it was okay. She then said a prayer, and that the Skinwalker was now gone. I have no idea how she knew, and I didn't care. Needless to say, I spent the rest of the night there, sleeping where I knew I would be safe. Two years ago, I went to go visit family up in North Minnesota around Labor Day weekend. I won't give the exact location, but will provide at least a general location where this happened. To keep it short, I'm hoping someone may have had similar experience or may have had a general idea what this theme or entity was walking around our tent. On that Labor Day weekend, my girlfriend and I were planning on spending time camping with her family. Both of us were very excited to get away from the everyday city life, and we anticipated a much-needed low-key weekend. We arrived at their location around noon on Saturday, and were all greeted by everyone there. During the day and evening, we were enjoying ourselves with random fun activities and catching up on how everyone was doing. As the night started to settle in, we were all near the campfire for a few hours, until 11 p.m. Eventually, the family and ourselves called it a night, and we all headed to bed. My girlfriend and I were offered a sleep in a bigger-size 6-person tent. It belonged to a relative who I will call Mary. It was a kind gesture at that time, as we only brought a 2-person-sized tent. Having that additional space for our belongings and our air mattress was a nice added feature. Mary's tent was positioned not too far from the campfire and the rest of the family. The family did a wonderful job clearing and maintaining the area for their smaller RVs and additional tents. To the back of the tent, about 20 to 30 yards, is where the woods started, with semi-thick brush and trees. Us three were laying down chatting, and eventually they both fell asleep. For some reason, though, I couldn't sleep, so I was on my phone passing time, hoping to eventually drift off to sleep. This is when I heard a faint noise in the woods about 40 yards back. I dismissed it right away as deer or known in this area, and I continued to space off on my phone looking at random things. About 10 to 20 minutes later, I heard something get closer to our tent. I could hear twigs snapping and moving between bushes, getting closer to our area. This started to get my attention as I could start physically feeling a faint shake in the ground as this thing was wandering around. Moments later, this thing was about 10 yards away from our area, walking, running back and forth. Whatever this thing was, with each step it took, I could physically feel the vibration from the ground. This sting was big, and the best way to describe this feeling is if you went to a live rock concert and you felt the kick drum hit your body. At this point, I was a bit terrified as I was trying to the footsteps, walking or running at the back and the side of the tent. This sting. I got at least 5 yards near our area, and then suddenly it stopped, where Mary was sleeping, at near her tent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, scared of what this thing was going to do next. I shit you not. A few seconds later, Mary shot up from being dead asleep. She gasped for air and was calling our names to wake us up. You could hear her voice. She was terrified. This steam hightailed off back into the woods. Both of us were very startled at this point. The woods had become dead silent, and eventually we got enough courage to look outside. We saw and heard nothing, and about 30 minutes later we ran to the shop to grab a shotgun. Another anomaly during this whole thing, while we were alert and awake. Mary mentioned during this time, I was awake as she was having a dream. She mentioned these themes were tormenting her, saying they wanted her soul and to give it to them. Girlfriend dismissed the whole thing and said it was most likely just a deer, etc., running around. After hearing my girlfriend say that, I never told anyone about the story, until recently as I started to think about it again, trying to figure out what the hell this thing or entity was. Even after all this happened a little under 10 years ago, I still plan on going to school to be a park ranger, just not in Wisconsin. So back around 2014, I was actually living up there. The whole state is basically one big-ass forest. I actually prefer being alone, or maybe with 1 or 2 other friends. The forest is perfect for getting away from everything. I never had any bad experiences, and love the outdoors. My dad bought a place in the far north in a very small town. It's in Phillips, if anyone's ever been there. We used it as a vacation home. It was a pretty rundown place, but we decided that we could fix it up. During the time of this, it was mid-June. My older brother and I decided to take a trip up north. It's about a 4-hour drive from where I live, and when I said it was in Phillips, I actually meant that Phillips is the closest town. We end up getting there. The driveway is about a half-a-mile long dirt trail through the forest. At this point, it was only my second time going there. The first time, I stayed for a whole half a day and then left, so I'm pretty much clueless about it. My dad seems to not really care that we go alone. We get there and it's still the same building. The garage is still kind of collapsing on itself. So we park outside. It's a pretty big open area with forest on all sides of us. Dad has a boat up there and a small river that runs through the land, so me and my brother can go fishing and stuff. We have a good time for the day. When it starts to get dark, we light a fire and drink. Typical teenage stuff. But midnight, we're too drunk to notice anything strange. We end up both passing out inside. Next morning, I wake up and find that my brother isn't in the cabin. He's outside, and I go over to see what he's saying to himself. I feel like crap from the night before. He's looking at something. A deer carcass is torn apart, and the head is on the dirt driveway. It's actually a lot more common here than you might think. I end up writing it off as maybe a bear. This was my first guess, considering that my dad had many pictures of bears walking around near the house. We spent maybe 5 minutes moving the deer off the driveway. It's the worst thing that I ever had to smell. After that, me and my brother ate some breakfast and headed into town. It was maybe a 10-minute drive or so from this place. He got us some more booze with his fake ID, and then we headed to the general store. Phillips has about 15,000 residents at this time, so everyone knows everything that happens. That's mainly why it didn't surprise me when the store owner knew that we were not from there, and that we were likely the people who bought the piece of land. The whole exchange between that shop owner and us seemed off to me. It was just one of those gut feelings. He told us about our neighbor, an older Native American man who never really left, who was always in his cabin, maybe a mile from our place. So we bought our stuff and hiked it back to our place. It was around noon at this point. I sat around. It was a Saturday, a lazy day. I have really bad hearing, but my brother heard a truck pulling up outside. We both go out wondering who the hell it could be. The truck's engine stops. The thing is covered in rust. The door opens. The first thing I see is a big pair of cowboy boots hit the ground. It's an old Native American man. I think he might be the neighbor. I was kind of hoping he wasn't, because he might see the alcohol that we have, and he might be able to tell that we're underage. But he introduced himself as the neighbor. The way he talked and his mannerisms, he seemed kind of off. He says that he decided to stop by. I heard quite a bit of noise coming from here last night. Me and my brother were pretty quiet from what I could remember, so I had no clue what he was talking about. I thought it could have been the bear, so I mentioned the deer that we found. Apparently, this was a very bad idea. He walked over to the side of the driveway, where we threw all the bits of deer. The guy turned around and stared at us. He said that bears usually don't kill things like that. At this point, I started to get a bad feeling about this whole area. This is when me and my brother should have left. But the old guy told us that he would stop by later on with a gift. Didn't care too much about it. I mean, he seemed all right other than being really weird. But on the other side of things, I do love hearing their stories. I always wanted to kind of sit down and have a drink with one, see what kind of stories they could tell me. The guy leaves. His truck is very loud. The rest of the day goes on quite normal. We went fishing on the river again, and we started up the fire when it got dark, so we're sitting around the fire. It was maybe 10 at night by this point, and my brother are drinking up a storm again. We're a bust, but not too drunk. We're waiting for that native guy to show up, and then we see headlights coming up the driveway. It happens to be the same loud truck as before, the same cowboy boots and the same guy, but this time he's holding something. It looks like a small bundle of something. He walked over towards me and my brother, and I can see what he's holding. It seems to be some bones. He sits down next to me, smiling. I was buzzing at this point, so I wasn't really freaked out by this. I asked him about the bones, and this is what's weird. He told me all about them, but I can't remember exactly what he said. I blame this on the drinking. But I do remember the key word that I got from him was Wendigo. My movie senses tingle. He tells us to take the bones and bury them in our yard before midnight, but he didn't specify why. Me and my brother both know stuff about the Wendigo. He tells us not to leave tonight. At this point, we didn't question. He gets up, nods to both of us, and leaves. So we took the bundle that he left, and we did exactly what he said. We buried them right then and there in front of the house, went straight inside, and locked all the fucking doors. It was a sleepless night. Me and my brother just stayed up talking about what could happen, horrible ways that we could die. I left my brother alone for a moment to go to the bathroom. I came back and he was passed out. I didn't bother waking him up, but I sure as hell wasn't going to go to bed. I ended up playing solitary for what felt like forever. And then, around 2 in the morning, I hear something outside. It sounded like a horse galloping. I didn't want to look outside, but I did anyway. I see a deer running across the tree line about 10 yards away. I watched it run. It looked like it tripped, or maybe something pulled it down. There was nothing else near it, from what I could see at least. The deer just sat there. It looked like it was in pain, but it wasn't making a sound. Then I hear some sort of screeching. I have gone hunting before. I have heard deer yell. I am familiar with many sounds, but this was definitely not normal. That's when I see something crawl up on the deer. It was smaller than me, but I couldn't get that much of a good look at it. But I could tell it was small, maybe 4 or 4.5 feet tall. I saw it doing something to the deer. I couldn't make out exactly what. I remember having binoculars somewhere, but I'm not sure if I really wanted to use them. But going against myself like I always do, I went ahead and got them. I looked through. This thing was still on the deer, but the deer was long dead. Its back was clawed, and the head was basically torn clean off. And then I kind of got a good look at this thing. It had no hair of any kind, just this pink, fleshy skin. It was just mirroring the deerest flesh against its face. I could actually make out some eyes now. I might sound sort of mellow retelling the story, but at that time it was terrifying, and I was basically shitting myself while seeing this. I decided to wake up my brother and tell him what's going on, and then the sun started to come up. We continued looking at it for a few hours. I guess it doesn't enjoy sunlight too much because it ran off. Me and my brother bolted out to the car and got the hell out of there. We didn't say one word to one another. My dad thought that we were idiots after we told him. It's been 2 years and he's gone up a lot more than I have. But as of 2017, he put it up for sale. The other weird thing that happened was when my dad went up there to investigate the weekend after. He said at the spot that we had buried something was dug up, but there was nothing in the hole. Plus, all the deer carcasses were gone. But I think that maybe that native guy came and cleaned them up. I know it's been so long now, but I wonder if it would be nice to go up there again. See if I can find that old cabin. Maybe stay around there and see what happens. So this happened to me when I was a kid, more like a teenager, and it was at my grandma's house where I grew up that I saw my first true skinwalker. I'll never forget that night, as long as I live. Ever since I was a little kid, I loved to go out and adventure and camp around in the hills behind my grandma's sheep, camp out on the eastern Navajo res. Every summer, once school was out, I would pack up my knife and all my scouting gear and head out to live with my grandparents for the summer, just so that I could learn how to be native and not so city-like as my parents would always tell me. Mind you, I am Navajo. However, I'm not too familiar with the culture as I grew up in the city itself. I love to go out and camp around in the hills behind my grandma's sheep camp out on the eastern Navajo rest. I would chop wood for the cooking stove, get water from the watering hole down the hill from my grandma's hogan, and also herd the sheep. I also like to go out and explore the surrounding hills and misses, where I would also go out on my own to camp, being that I was an Auto-American decorated Boy Scout from the big city of Albuquerque. So one July evening, I set out to the west to find a good campsite to have my summer adventures at, not knowing the bad luck the next few hours would bring. All I had taken with me was my survival knife, my gear, my radio, and my bag of goodies and dinner snacks that I would be cooking up later on that night. The sun was now setting and I had to get to work on setting up my campfire. As I listened to my music, I gathered up firewood, chased some lizards, and 2 jackrabbits that got away from me. Too bad. They would have made a great dinner because, at the time, I was getting really hungry. It was all fun and games and I loved it until that evening. As I was setting up a tent for my campsite and a place to put a small fire to roast marshmallows and hot dogs, I noticed someone with what seemed to be an old-style lantern doing something off in the distance. Out of curiosity, I moved in closer to get a better look as it looked like they were burying something in the ground. Maybe they were burying a pet or some kind of treasure. A body? I hope not. Whatever it was, I was debating if I would tell my grandpa to call the Navajo police. With curiosity, I wanted to investigate what is going down the hill from where I was. Anyhow, it was weird to be doing such things at this hour after the sun had set. I was told that Navajos don't do those things at night, ever. As I got closer, I knew what it was the moment I saw it, by the soft dual glow of its light. I knew it was a skinwalker. My heart stopped, and I'll be honest, I peed on myself a little bit. I so much wanted to scream for help. I knew if I did so, that thing would be burying me next to whatever it had just buried as well. So I just laid there silent for a long time after it went on its way, not wanting it to see or hear me. After a while, I took a good look around, making sure that the coast was all clear. After that, I made my way back up the hill, back to my tent, and prayed until I fell asleep. Never once started my fire. I didn't want to see my fire, so I stayed quiet in the darkness the whole time. The spot I had chosen was perfect at keeping me in a hiding spot. The small rock wall was my wind barrier. As the other surrounding rocks kept my tent hidden from the Skinwalker, I was 2 miles from my grandma's place, and I didn't want to travel back in the darkness of the night with that thing lurking out. So I waited until sunrise. Then I went home after a quick nap. I was so tired from staying up all night. So when I woke up, I gathered my gear, covered up my fireplace along with my tracks, and ran back to my grandma's hogan. It was a little bit after midday when I finally got home as I told my grandma what I saw. I got myself into more trouble by doing so. She and my grandpa were so mad at what I did and what I saw. So much so that my summer was now over, basically. I had to have a medicine man pray over me for 3 days and nights. It was known as the Navajo blackening ceremony, and it had to be done over me to chase away the evil that I had witnessed and got in contact with. What the medicine man told me next is something that I'll never forget. He said that the thing touched me while I was sleeping, and it also knew who I was. I guess when I woke up from my nap, I didn't notice the footprints it left beside me. Apparently, as I slept, it did its witching on me as well, and I thought they only did their evil at night. We later found out in another ceremony that that thing was sent by a close family friend to my grandparents, and it was doing a witching towards them both to try to get their land and livestock from them. After finding all of that out, the medicine man had to do another ceremony. It was called the Evil Way, to send all that witchcraft back to the ones that were doing all the witching. After all was done, while he was packing up, the old Navajo medicine man told me a story about when he was my age. As he sat there eating a donut and drinking his coffee that my grandma made him, he told us how he would help his grandpa to do prayers and ceremonies for needful people at his grandpa's hogan. He said that one time, the first time that he saw a Skinwalker shapeshift in front of him, he and his cousin were chopping wood for the ceremony's fire when they noticed a strange shape coming up to the hogan. He said that they both screamed into the night as they both ran inside to tell his grandfather that a Skinwalker was coming to get them all. His grandfather just laughed and told the boys to calm down and not to be afraid, and that fear is what evil feeds on. He then told him to sit down and pray, and that no matter what, do not look at the evil or its face when it comes inside the holy place. Soon enough, this thing stepped inside the hokan and began to speak in Navajo to his grandfather. Its voice was very rough and shaky as it said hello in Navajo. It continued to speak in a polite manner and even introduced itself and spoke of its Navajo clan. Then it got down on its knees and begged for forgiveness. As this man, broke down and cried to the old medicine man, his grandfather patted the dark stranger on his head and back, blessing him with the smoke, the water, and the eagle feathers. They prayed for forgiveness, and they spoke of how the stranger would make a change into his new life. Then the old medicine man took some things and tossed them all into the fire, along with some cedar, to send the evil on its way back to the darkness. At that very moment, one of the visiting people in the meeting stood up and began to scream and curse at everyone in the room. With the eagle feathers in hand, the old man calmly splashed the blessed water into the deranged woman. At that moment, that person fell to the ground, ripped off her clothes, rolled into a ball, and crawled out of there. That was the first time I saw a naked woman, and to be honest, it scared me. The medicine man laughed to himself as he took a final sip of his coffee. He then said that they later had to track down where that witch had gone and take care of her in her witchcraft ways, basically meaning that they had to kill this woman, which was a Skinwalker. After that story and that moment, well, it all sounds like adventure is fun and games, but as I later found out, it all comes at a price, a very dangerous price, but that's a story for another day. Living in a small town has its advantages. For example, you get to know everyone who lives there pretty quickly. If you ever have a problem, chances are that there's someone in town with the expertise to help you, like Jimmy, our local handyman, electrician, and plumber. If you have a household problem, Jimmy's your guy. If you got a more difficult problem, then you probably want Mac. He's our town sheriff, the only law enforcement we have for a few miles. Are you feeling hungry? Then Sherry's the gal for you. She runs a diner in the center of town, and her pie is out of this world. What I'm trying to say is that it pays to know people. Another thing I find fantastic about living in a small town is the sheer amount of nature that surrounds us. Untouched by man, the trees seem to grow endlessly into the sky. The nearby creek is crystal clear, not like those contaminated ones I hear about in the city. But I think the best part about living so far away from the city is the peace and quiet. It's intoxicating. Occasionally, sometimes you'll hear the rumbling of a semi-truck passing by, but that's about it. You could step outside your door at any given time and be greeted with pure silence. I have always found the silence peaceful, like our town was secretly tucked away from the rest of the world. Even though I do enjoy the peace and quiet, that's not always the case for a lot of people. I work in the Oni gas station for miles, and we often get a lot of people stopping by there to refuel before heading back onto the road. Even though most of the people tend to fill up at the pump and continue their journey, sometimes I'll still get people to come inside, and I'll mention how unnaturally quiet it is in this town. Since I only lived in this town my entire life, I never noticed how different it is from the rest of the world. But I'll just take their word for it. It just makes me uneasy. It's what one of the customers said to me when I inquired. They said they couldn't put their finger on it. Just something about the silence of our town made them uncomfortable. Well, this town makes me uncomfortable too. But it's not the silence that drives my fear. It's something that happened to me when I was a kid. My friend Tommy and I were always together as children. We would do everything together. Explore the forest, fish in the creek, play in one of the many meadows that littered our town until the moon signaled our curfew. It was early October when it happened. We were playing together as usual, riding bikes up and down the town until he got the bright idea to pay a visit to the Blackbriar farm. Now, this farm has a bit of history, but I'll try to sum it up. Basically, the Blackbriars were the first to settle in this town. They were a working-class family, and their main export was corn. They had cornfields as far as the eye could see. The town itself was in the early stages of forming next to the farm. Then one day, in the middle of October, the entire Blackbriar family disappeared. Nobody knew why. Some people said that the head of the household, Michael Blackbriar, took sick and passed away, and at that point, the farm was too much to maintain without him, so his family left the farm for greener fields. Others think a pack of wolves or some other animal got to the family and tore them apart, and they were never seen again. Regardless of what happened, the farm was abandoned and had been left untouched for decades. For some reason, our town either didn't have the will or the means to tear the farm down and start something new, so the old farmhouse was just left standing there. Even though the house remained empty, the cornfield seemed to continue to grow year after year. They would produce, and even our local market owner would pick fresh corn from the field and use it. "There's no point in letting it go to waste," they would say. Then the field would wither and die, only to regrow all over again the following year. So Tommy wanted to go exploring in the field. He had this absurd notion that the Blackbriars had stashed her treasure somewhere on the farm itself. After all, they were a supplier of produce for a while, and the town didn't have a bank during those times, so they had to do something with all that money. Well, the sun was quickly setting as we approached the edge of the farm. Reluctantly, I followed Tommy into the looming forest of dried corn husk. Our footsteps crunched beneath us as we marched further inward. It was deafening how loud our footsteps were in comparison to the rest of our surroundings. As we pressed on, we began to hear a new sound. It was faint over the crunch of our footfalls at first, but as we walked closer, the sound grew louder. It was crying. Someone was sitting in the cornfield, softly crying to themselves. Unsure of the situation, I asked Tommy if we could head back, but he shook his head, mentioning that someone might need our help. We found ourselves in a small clearing in the field. On the other side from where we enter, we saw it. Or I should say, her. It was a woman. She was sitting on the cold ground. She was wearing a silky white dress which had been stained by the dirt she rested on. Long brownish-black hair covered her face and shoulders. She sat facing away from us, and the sobs that she was doing seemed to reverberate off the surrounding stalks of corn. Tommy fearlessly approached her and asked her if she was all right. When he did, her sobs instantly stopped, and the overwhelming silence returned. She rose to her feet, still facing away from us. I took a step backward, while Tommy took a step ahead. Then she turned. But how she did it triggered alarms off in my head. 1 second, she was facing away, and in the blink of an eye, she was turned towards us, as if she were a glitch in a video game. She raised her head, and her hair parted from her face, revealing a gory facade. Its flesh clung to her skull like tape. Half of her jawbone was exposed. Her eyes were gray and lifeless. Dirt seemed to pepper the remaining parts of her skin, which combined to form a sickly brownish color. Tommy and I both screamed. I immediately turned to run away, but then I heard Tommy call out to me. My body reacted on its own, and I turned back. Tommy had been grabbed. Her hand gripped his wrist so tight that even from where I was standing, I could hear the bones in Tommy's wrist begin to splinter. Her mouth began to open and separate, as if she were some sort of snake-like creature. She pulled him closer and raised him up. Tommy struggled to turn his head away from the creature to look at me, and managed to say one thing to me, the last thing I would ever hear from my best friend. "Run," and I did. I ran through the cornfield as fast as I could. Tears streamed down my face like a waterfall as I realized I left my best friend behind to die. I made it to my bike and pedaled as fast as I could to the police station. I told Mac everything that happened. He quickly gathered up a search party, and it was almost every single person in town. After going through the cornfield for hours, they found no trace of the woman, and the only thing they found of Tommy's was a shoe. Weeks turned into months, which turned into years. Eventually, everyone in the town started to forget. It was just another tragic missing child's case to everyone. Aside from Tommy's parents and myself, that is. New children began telling stories about the cornfield. How anyone who goes in is never heard from again. Those stories aren't entirely accurate because I was there with Tommy that day. And I made it out, alive. Not a single day goes by that I don't regret what I did. And not a single night goes by that I don't have to drink myself into a drunken slumber. Ever since I started working at this gas station, I saved up enough money to move away from this town for good, to start a new life somewhere, far away, away from the cornfield, and away from the tragic memory of my dear friend. I planned on leaving at the end of October, but 2 nights ago, after I was closing up the gas station, I heard it, the sirens broken, by some faint sobs coming from the other side of the road. My body ceased as I saw her, standing there on the other side of the road. I wanted to believe that I was just seeing things, but I knew better than that. She was facing away from me, and without even giving her a second to turn around, I ran to my car, got inside, and drove away. I'm at home right now, and I wanted to type this up before I leave this place for good, just so whoever hears this knows how sorry I am for Tommy and to stay away from the Blackbriar farm. I'm not really sure where I'm going to go, but I need to hurry. I left my window open, and I think I just heard some crying coming from outside. So if I don't make it, remember, if you hear a woman softly crying to herself, just stay away and call the police. Or you might end up just like my best friend, Tommy. Following is a story my grandpa used to tell me before he passed away. A disclaimer, I'm not reading into history and I'm just telling the story the way I remember hearing it. Some places and dates might be slightly off. So my grandpa was a British infantryman in the Second World War. He was about 19 years old when he enlisted to serve his country, and while he thought that joining the military would give him some opportunities to look at some exotic locations around the world, he was never deployed to Italy or the Pacific. Instead, he ended up practically in his own backyard, Switzerland. Now, this is just some historical information, but it's important to understand before reading the rest of the story. Switzerland did its best to maintain neutral status throughout the war. But regardless of this, Switzerland was still highly sought after by both parties. Once the Nazis began committing acts of aggression against Switzerland, England provided reinforcements to the Swiss military. Yet, in an effort to prevent open war within its borders, the Swiss government made its military and the British reinforcements to perform a series of tactical retreats into the Alps. That's how my grandpa found himself stationed in the remote village in the Swiss Alps. At this time, it was early in the winter of 1943. My grandpa's company was stationed in a secluded village of about 500 people. The good thing that they had here was that it was really hard to get to and therefore had little chance of being spontaneously invaded by Nazi Germany. But this was also a bad thing. It made communication with the rest of Swiss military very difficult. The issue with communication was further compounded when, sometime in early December, a few blizzards swept through the region and destroyed the few lines of communication that they had in first place. So they were trapped in this isolated Swiss village without being able to make contact with the rest of the army. My grandpa's captain decided it would be best to uphold the commands and continue defending the village. A few weeks passed, and he rose to the outside world where, buried in 79 feet of dense snowfall, and any telegraph phone lines that they had were useless. It grew deeper into winter. The leaves were stripped from the trees, and the bare trunks protruded from the mountainside like broken ribs. The town was between 2 large mountains. Sunlight only directly reached the town for a few hours each day, making the soldiers feel as if they were living in a state of dusk. One night, my grandpa was at the town bar with a few of his friends from the company, and a group of locals went up to them. One of them was visibly angry. All of the Swiss people in the town grew up speaking German, and none of them were used to having Brits around. So one of them began shouting in broken English, "Where to take you children?" The children. Luckily, one of the guys my grandpa was drinking with was able to speak fluent German, and he was able to act as a translator. After several minutes of confusion and yelling, The translator turned to my grandpa and the rest of the soldiers and said, "They say that some of the children have gone missing. They're telling us that we need to do something about it." Now, obviously, the British military doesn't exactly act as a bunch of mercenaries for hire. So my grandpa and his friends told the villagers to come back to the headquarters, which was really just to make sure barracks that they had thrown together in the town's church because of the language barrier. The villagers talked with the captain, and it took about 2 hours. And basically what the captain and a self-designated translator were able to piece together was that a few weeks after the company came into the village, the locals started noticing a few incidents. At first it was just simple stuff like vanishing pieces of wood, but over the following 2 months, people realized that valuable items were being stolen from their homes as well. One man claimed that his family heirloom, a handmade ceremonial traditional Swiss war axe, had been taken from above his fireplace mantel. The one factor of all these things was when a child went missing. Of course, many people assumed that the disappearance, although tragic, could be attributed to something as simple as the boy falling into a snowdrift while playing outside, or possibly being attacked and killed by a wolf or some other animal. However, there wasn't only one child that went missing. There were several. The villager who entered the bar who looked the most upset, that was the father of 2 young boys who had gone missing 2 days before. He had looked everywhere for them. He even rounded up a group of his fellow townspeople to join the effort, but they couldn't find a single clue as to what happened to the children. The captain told the villagers that he would continue to look into this matter, and that he would begin sending some of his men to patrol the streets each night, looking for whoever or whatever was the culprit behind all the strange things going on. Later that night, Private Regional disappeared from the barracks. Disappearing children are one thing, but a grown man, it seemed unlikely that some animal, even a wolf, could have taken down a healthy, full-grown man on its own. Naturally, the rumors began to spread that there was some sort of monster living in the mountains that would come down to feast on the occupants of the village. Despite the nightly patrolling ordered by the captain, the disappearances kept happening. Reginald was the only adult victim of whatever was preying on the village. The rest of the victims were all young kids between the ages of 5 and 10. All in all, including the original 3 kids who had gone missing, 7 children vanished from the town. Many people in my grandpa's company were growing suspicious. One explanation that got passed around was that some of the villagers were actually selling their own children to human traffickers for extra cash. But even that didn't make sense because the roads into and out of the town were still blocked by snow. 3 more weeks passed without incident. At this point it was about early spring and the snow was starting to melt. That night, when my grandpa was on patrol with several other soldiers, they discovered what was behind the children's and Reginald's disappearances. It was sometime past midnight when my grandpa and his buddies noticed a figure appearing through the bedroom window of one of the villagers' houses. My grandpa was at the opposite end of the street, so at first the figure looking through the window didn't see the patrol. My grandpa and the other soldiers yelled at the prowler, and right away it tore itself away from the window. Everyone assumed this was the person behind the disappearances and break-ins. They ran as fast as they could in pursuit, through the melting snow and ice in the dead of night, screaming at whatever it was to stop. They kept running and running as soon as they found themselves on the outskirts of where the snow was still fairly deep. This person, this figure, jumped into the ground. For a quick second, it looked like it vanished into thin air. But as the patrol got close, they realized that the prowler had actually jumped into a quote-unquote cave that had been hollow out in the side of a snowdrift when the soldiers began yelling into the cave for the figure to come out and show itself. Several gunshots exploded out of the entrance to the snow cave. Without thinking, my grandpa and the rest of the patrol shouldered their weapons and I began firing into the hole. They waited for what seemed like hours, but was really only few minutes. One brave member of the patrol volunteered to climb into the cave and investigate. He drew his pistol and crawled into the cave. A few seconds later, he came out with a completely horrified expression on his face. My grandpa took out his flashlight and shined it into the cave when he saw the gruesome explanation behind all the strange things going on in the town. But there was also the bodies of 7, partially, children who had been eaten because of the stress of being snowed in all winter. Living in near constant darkness or some sort of terrible mental issue, Reginald had gone completely insane and had begun breaking into the villagers' houses and snatching the kids from their homes in the middle of the night. And the ceremonial axe that was reported missing, he used it to dismember the bodies and would hide them in the cave that he had carved into the snowdrift. Be safe. You never know what the person next to you is capable of. Before I start, I feel like I should let something very clear. I love Ellen. We've been living together for about 3 years now. In fact, we were childhood friends. And I know this may sound like a fairy tale to some people, but it truly felt like we were always destined to be together. Even after graduation, when we started dating other people, it only felt truly right when we were with each other. So I don't know what took me so long to ask her out, but I'm really glad that I did. We have the same taste in music, in movies, and even food. We laugh at the same dumb jokes, and we know exactly how to comfort each other in times of need. She's the kindest, most gentle and loving girl I ever met. We've even been talking about our plans for marriage, and how we would like to have kids of our own, and this is why it hurts so much how it all went terribly wrong in just 4 nights. I would also like to say that Ellen doesn't have much of a family other than me and some very distant aunts that she never met, and that she doesn't even know their names. I was born in a big family with 4 siblings and plenty of cousins that were always visiting us and even helping out when we got in trouble. Ellen has none of that. She doesn't have any siblings, and her father was an alcoholic, abusive freak that died when she was young. Her mother was a very kind and inspiring person that took care of the family by herself for many years, and almost a second mother to myself, you can say. So when she passed away last year, it hurt us both for a long time. But Ellen stays strong. She's not the type to let her feelings easily surface, so you gotta be a lot more perceptive to give what she truly feels. I used to pride myself in being capable of that. I felt like I knew her better than I knew myself. That's why this is all so strange and frankly terrifying. We were sleeping in bed and I was dreaming. I don't remember what it was about until I heard her voice very close to my ear. Knock, 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 knock. She was caressing my hair. Gently while sitting in bed and looking below at me, I slowly opened my eyes, groggy from sleep. Hey, what is it, babe? She kept looking at me and repeated, knock, 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 knock. I looked over at the digital clock on top of the dresser. 3:27 a.m. I had work in only a few hours. Hey, what is it, Ellen? She paused for a second. Knock, 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 knock. Fine, I accepted, mostly because I was expecting some kind of surprise. Ellen wasn't the type to do what she was doing for no reason. Who's there? Her smile opened up and she answered, Not me, so don't answer the door. I kept looking at her, dumbfounded. Is that it? Is that the joke? Yes, she said, laying on the couch and covering herself with a blanket. Thank you for answering. Weirdo, I answer, closing my eyes and going back to sleep. The next morning things went as normal. I only remember the strange conversation while I was alone in the bathroom, brushing my teeth. I wasn't even sure if it had truly happened or if it was just a weird dream. So we had our breakfast together and she was acting normal, reading something from a fashion magazine. Frankly, I wasn't paying much attention, so I took the opportunity to ask about last night. Initially, she didn't seem to know what I was talking about. Then, she fixed her eyes on me, and the same smile from last night crossed her face, just briefly. And I knew it wasn't just a dream. She told me it wasn't anything important, and she stopped paying attention when I started asking more. And even though I shouldn't, I gave up. I had work and other matters to attend to, and I just brushed off the weird event, thinking it wouldn't happen again. But the following night, I woke up to her voice. Knock, knock. A pause. Knock, knock. What is it now? I said. Ellen, what are you doing? Knock, knock. She repeated. This time she wasn't even touching me, just sitting in bed, looking at me with that same smile. But her eyes seemed larger, and she blinked in longer intervals. I looked at the clock and once again, 3:27 a.m. Ellen, come on, what is it? I got work in a few hours. I can't be waking up in the middle of the night to answer some knock-knock jokes. Knock, knock. This is getting creepy, you know? I'm not sure if this is some kind of joke you've been doing, but I don't like it. Answer it. Knock, knock. I sighed, but also let a small laugh escape. It was creepy, of course, but she was my Ellen, but it didn't bother me as much as it should. All right, fine. Who the fuck is there? I answered in a playful tone. Not me, so don't answer the door. For some reason, I felt a chill down in my spine. It was the same answer as before, and I still didn't get what it meant. But the way she said it, with a strange monotone voice, contrasted well with her smile and the fact that I had no idea what she meant by that. What does that mean?" I asked. "I really don't get it." She just smiled and went back to sleep. The next day, we talked again about what was happening. She was starting to ignore my questions, and I barely got her to say anything. It was almost like she couldn't talk about it, which was very off considering we talk about pretty much everything. I told her I needed to be well rested for work, something she should understand well, and wasn't liking her little gag every night as I didn't want to hurt her feelings. When I got back home, we had dinner, we watched the movie and went to bed. Knock, knock. I opened my eyes faster this time around. In fact, I barely got any sleep. I just knew she would do it again and kept thinking about it the whole time. I glanced at the clock. 3:27 a.m. Knock, knock. I thought about ignoring her, just pretending I was asleep, and she wouldn't wake me up. So I closed my eyes slowly, hoping that she hadn't seen me opening them in the first place, and stayed quiet. Knock, knock, she continued. She didn't stop. I controlled my breathing, but she kept going. Knock, knock. I'm not answering your fucking joke, Ellen. Stop it. Knock, knock. I ignored, but she kept going. She had never been this insistent with anything before. I tried to ignore it, but it was getting on my nerves, and frankly, I felt scared. Why the fuck was Ellen doing this? Why every night? I didn't have the same exact time down to the minute. Why wouldn't she let me sleep until I answer her? Knock, knock. I got up in a sudden movement. Ellen, God damn it. I was ready for a discussion, but when I finally glanced at her, it was almost like everything was strained for me. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't blinking, just staring right at me like an animal, and her mouth was moving slowly and she didn't stop. Knock, knock. I didn't know how to react or what expression I had when I saw her, but my heart skipped a beat. It was terrifying, as if her gaze froze me in place. 1,000-yard stare. Knock, knock. Who's there? I asked, feeling as if it was the only way out of that fucking nightmare. Not me, so don't answer the door. Ellen slowly closed her eyes and laid down. I kept staring at her while she fell into what seemed to be a deep sleep. I got up and left. I walked downstairs and sat down at the couch in the living room, staring at the night sky outside and soaking the quietness of the neighborhood. My heart was beating fast and it didn't slow down. I was too scared to sleep in the same room as my girlfriend, all because of a fucking knock-knock joke, but it was unnatural. I thought about calling someone. I thought about it all being some kind of sleep-related issue, such as some type of sleepwalking, but it didn't make any sense. I felt so tired, and decided that early in the morning I would call an old friend who's a psychologist and get the opinion of a professional. I knew something was wrong with Ellen. I stayed in the couch as the day rose, and once Ellen woke up, she was acting normal again. Even asked me why I wasn't in bed. I didn't answer. In fact, I didn't talk to her and simply left for work. She seemed very upset, but I wouldn't do anything about it. Once I got to work, I called my friend. I told him everything that was happening with every single detail as I'm describing right now. He didn't seem as worried, but we agreed in making an appointment for next week. Now, I just needed to convince Ellen to come with me. I received plenty of text messages from her. She seemed very worried, sad, and even confused. She apologized a lot, and it broke my heart a little bit. I felt bad. I shouldn't have, but I answered her and made her promise it wouldn't happen again. I also told her about the appointment, and she hesitated for a moment, but she agreed to go with me, so we made up. This was Ellen, after all, the girl I knew ever since I was 6 years old, the woman I loved that had taken care of me for many years. And as much as the strange behavior creeped me out, she wasn't actually doing anything scary or even dangerous, so, for a while, I convinced myself I should give her another chance. When I returned home from work, we stayed together. She even got my favorite meal ready. Ellen was acting as gentle and caring as I'd always remembered, and I slept with her in our bedroom, even though I didn't want to. Knock. I couldn't believe it. She fucking promised me she wouldn't. Knock. I gazed at the clock. 3:27 a.m. Knock. I was laying on my stomach and I couldn't see her face. In fact, I didn't even bother to look at her. I was feeling more sad than scared at this point. Sad that she had broken her promise. Knock. Who's there? I answer, determined to just go back to sleep. Not me, so I don't answer the door. I stayed quiet, and I closed my eyes. I just hoped I would be able to handle it until the appointment next week. To my surprise, I was actually able to sleep, maybe because I hadn't been able to rest since last night. The following morning, I went back to not saying anything to Ellen, only very limited responses. I was expecting her to act same as yesterday, trying to apologize, but she didn't. Mostly she didn't even say anything, almost as if she had accepted it. She also looked tired, or at least a bit weak. I went to work, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. I didn't receive any messages. Once I got back, we had the most silent dinner I ever had in my life, and she barely ate anything. I decided to let her have the bedroom, and I would end up sleeping on the sofa. I wasn't sure if it would stop her, but I held on to the hope that she wouldn't go downstairs, only to tell me the same fucking knock-knock joke again. I covered myself with a blanket, shaked off the uneasy feeling, and tried to get some sleep. I had a deep sleep, without dreams. I felt like I was lost in darkness. Then, I heard somebody. I opened my eyes, and I saw Ellen, standing above me, looking at me with big eyes and dilated pupils that didn't seem to belong in such a completely neutral expression. Watching me sleep, I almost screamed in fear, jumped out of the couch, and her eyes followed me as I stumbled across the dark room, creating distance between us. For a moment, I was able to glance at the clock above the table, 3:27 a.m. "Ellen, what the fuck are you doing?" I asked, desperate. But she didn't move. In fact, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me as if I was made of glass and she could see right through me. Then I heard a knock on the front door. I looked over in that direction, and it was followed by another knock and another, someone almost pounding at the door. I glanced back at Ellen, and she was still staring at me. Slowly, I got closer to the door, and she didn't move. The pounding continued. "Who's there?" I screamed. It stopped, and then I heard a voice. "John? John, can you hear me? Open the door, please. John, please, open the door." A frozen place. The voice kept calling me, but I couldn't believe it. It was Ellen's voice, coming from the other side of the door. But it couldn't be. "I beg you, John, open the door. She's not me." Slowly, I turned my head to look at Ellen, standing in front of the couch, and she was looking at me with the same eyes and a terrible wide grin across her face. The pounding continued. "John, open the door, please." I stay still, not knowing what to do, and then, I don't remember what happened after that. I just woke up in my bedroom. The digital clock indicates 4:21 a.m. Ellen isn't by my side. I'm completely alone. I'm trembling, uncontrollably, and I'm not sure what's going on. I don't remember what happened after I saw her terrible grin. I'm not even sure if I opened the door. I tried to look for my phone, see if I could call the police, or at least someone that I know, but I left it downstairs. All I have is Ellen's laptop, and it's where I'm writing this right now, to get some sort of advice, because I know I can't. Go downstairs. Everything is dark. Very dark, almost as if the shadows are leaning into the room, and I can also hear a low scratching sound. What should I do? I'm a big believer in not inviting anyone to my home on the rest. That includes my own family, my own relatives. My home is my temple, and it's sacred to me. If I don't invite you over, don't come to my home. I really don't care what you say. I will take friends to lunch, or for anybody that comes out of town, I'll even pay for your hotel. But my home is off limits, and I'm mindful of this when I travel. I will impose this on friends or family as well. You can call me paranoid or living in fear. I just like to protect myself from all evil, jealousy, and envy out there. And we all know how family BS drama can be out here. Now, I wasn't always this way. I used to live out on the Navajo res, on the mesa close to a lake. My boyfriend and I were living in a small camper right outside of a hole gun he was building. We also had a big female dog, and she was basically the alarm system. She happened to have some puppies. She happened to have a few puppies, and my boyfriend and I picked out 2 of them to keep. So we ended up having 3 dogs. So when I first moved there, it was nice and beautiful. I was warned by my boyfriend's mom that people will be jealous of us because we were a productive couple. We were always doing something to make our home inviting. I say jealous of us because I am not Navajo. I am Hopi. Not that we are better than others, but you know how people are quick to hate or envy others who are not part of your own tribe. One evening, after a long day of work, we sat at the edge of the mesa. There was a steep trail that led down to the lake area. We were sitting there and just watching the colors of this beautiful sunset. We didn't really talk much. We were just admiring the area. All of a sudden, our dogs started barking. Sometimes when they bark, they all do it towards the same direction, but this time the dog seemed aggressive, confused, but also scared at the same time. It's almost like they could sense something, but they had no idea where it was exactly. We got up and looked towards the road. We didn't see anything. The dogs then ran and hid in their own doghouses. My gut was telling me that something was close, but there was nothing around. So I stayed close to my boyfriend as we started getting the tools together and put them away. The sky happened to be a dark, red-orange color, and for some reason, I was afraid to look around. Felt like I was going to see something. Then, a terrible smell came out of nowhere. It smelled like a rotting carcass. I froze up but didn't want to show my fear. My boyfriend and I started moving fast to get our things put away and to get inside the hogan. We were close to the north side of the hogan when we saw something. It was moving really fast on the dirt road. We thought it must have been a burrow or a shape because the shape was large. It didn't have the movement of an animal. It was running on two legs that almost seemed to be deformed, and it was moving at a fast pace. The arms were long and the hands were also large. It was running hunched over with the back of its hands flopping on the ground. We just stood there shocked in disbelief of what we were looking at. This thing didn't look at us or even come towards us. It just kept moving in a straight direction. As it passed in the view across from us, I saw and heard the bones that were around its neck. It also had long, sticky-looking hair. It looked like a person. The clothes looked like dusty old leather. There was nowhere for it to go except for the cliffside. Then, whatever this thing was, it grunted a sick gargoyle sound, and it jumped off the cliff. After it jumped off, everything else was gone, the smell and the creepy feeling. If I had to describe it, I would say that it looked like a deformed human. After we went inside the Hulk gun, my boyfriend simply said, "Welcome to the Navajo rest." He grabbed the cedar and sage and then said, "Let's pray, smudge, and it will leave us alone. We don't acknowledge anything out here. If you see something, you leave it alone, and they will also leave you alone." The smoke filled the air, the smell of sage and cedar. I was hoping what he was saying was true, but deep down, I just felt like something wasn't right. Well, that night, as we tried to sleep, at some point around 3 inches the morning, I heard it, a sickening sound, far off in the distance. I looked over at my boyfriend, who was fast asleep beside me. Let me just say that he didn't wake up at all. At this point I heard more of those strange noises, but they sounded really far off, like they were coming from somewhere deep in the night. Soon it got quiet, and I somehow fell back asleep. The next day, my boyfriend didn't mention a thing about it, nor did I. We just went about our own day as if nothing happened, but as we went about our day and working, he simply said, "From now on, let's make sure we come inside before nighttime." This was the first incident of many, and when I tell people this story, they say that I couldn't have been a skinwalker, because they wouldn't have let me live, or maybe I was getting chased by somebody else. Regardless, I wish that was true. I know this isn't a scary story you can say, but this is real life, and if this didn't put fear in you, I will now be getting into a more serious incident that actually happened that changed my perspective of many things. Whether you believe me or not, that is up to you. A few weeks went by. We still continued working on the hogan. I can't remember how it happened, but my boyfriend had gone to the store to buy a few things. I was outside. It was during the day when this woman, who was walking with a boy, just casually says, "Hey, sweetie," thinking that she was going to ask for help or directions or something, but instead she walks up to me and says, "You two really have it going on out here." Then she asks me if my boyfriend is around. At that point, maybe I was just ignorant or not expecting anything weird, but then I said, "Yeah, he'll be back in a few." I assumed that she was related to him because his family all lived not too far away from here. We started talking, and to my surprise, she does say that she's related to my boyfriend and that she was coming by to see both of us. I believed her. I highly doubt this woman with a small boy were planning anything, and so I ended up inviting them into the camper. I offered them a drink, and I kid you not, her son looked very malnourished and poor. So I then said, "If he wants a sandwich or something, just let me know." We continued talking, And then I heard my boyfriend pull up. He came inside, and when he did, he's all like, "Hey, nice to meet you." Now, let me explain the setup. The way the lady was sitting down, she had her back against my boyfriend when he walked in. He didn't see her face right away. That is, until he came around the sofa to greet her. That's when it clicked inside of me. You don't know her? What the fuck? That's when we both looked at her. And I kid you not, my boyfriend just snapped, "Bitch, get out of here." And she got up and left, without saying anything. It was so weird. I didn't know what to think. But everything about the situation felt weird. My boyfriend explained after she got kicked out that, "We don't know her. She's not family or anything. She's one of those women that people talk about around here, messing with things. There's so many rumors about her. I just never thought she would ever show up here. Again, I'm not Danae. I am Hopi, and I thought this woman knew my boyfriend because she did ask for him by name. My way is to be hospitable to company. That's how I was raised. I guess I learned about Danae ways because of this whole incident. Then, my boyfriend's mom calls, and she's asking what that woman was doing at the Hogan. Mind you, she lives down the road, so she sees everything. I told her about the visit, and she said to not let that woman back around and to be safe. I had a lot of questions, but I didn't bother to ask anything more about her. So a few nights later, as we're outside wrapping everything up for the nighttime beat us around. And as we're out there, that's when we saw some light. Almost like someone was walking with a flashlight towards the Hogan on the dirt path. The dogs didn't even bark. We just continued watching it get closer, waiting to see who it was. Meanwhile, the light was bobbing up and down. Then, all of a sudden, it just disappeared. My boyfriend and I were looking at each other like, what the heck? So we closed up the hold-on and went into the camper. As we were getting ready to go to sleep that night, my boyfriend jumps off the bed saying, "What the fuck?" and he has a cat in his hand. He had it by the scruff and threw it out the front door. I was dumbfounded, thinking where the hell this cat came from and how I didn't feel it crawling up his leg, under the blanket or anything, since he was laying right next to me. I ended up calling my mother-in-law that night, and I told her everything that was going on about the strange woman, the flashlight, and this cat showing up inside our home. Basically, she said we needed to go see a medicine man right away. She said that the cat had already found its way inside. Basically then, this means that whatever was happening has already found its way into our home, basically into our lives. Apparently something had been sent to us, and it was only going to get worse. My boyfriend agreed, and at the recommendation of my mother-in-law, she said, "It will see so-and-so. I will mention its real name, but I am going to call him Mike." So the next day we went to go see Mike, and he told us that the woman visitor, quote-unquote, sent the cat because she wanted my man. We were also advised that the woman was not going to give up trying to get my man, and that the next time that the cat comes around, we need to catch it and kill it. That way she will leave him alone. We thanked him and went back on our way. I forgot to mention that the medicine man also gave us some medicine bundles, and he also gave my boyfriend some cleansing cloth, whatever it was. He did mention that this woman was Danae, and she lived about 1.5 miles down the road. The boy that was with her was her son. He was ill. He was sick, and he also said that these things happened to her and her son because she has been mingling with evil spirits. So he said to be careful around her. Sure enough, my boyfriend actually caught this cat 4 days later, but it went crazy on him. It ended up scratching him pretty bad, and it even tried to bite him and ran off. 3 days after that, he caught it again, and he grabbed the hatchet and took the cat out some yards away from our home. Not sure what happened, but all I remember is hearing the deepest, most ugly growling sound that I ever heard. And trust me, it definitely didn't sound like a cat. Nothing else happened for the next few days, and at this point we're almost done with the whole gang. However, strange things started to happen. My boyfriend was getting up in the middle of the night, telling me to be quiet, that there was someone talking outside. But it was already quiet and I couldn't hear anything. My boyfriend then started showing paranoid behavior, slowly losing interest in building our home, and he even stopped taking care of himself. He ended up doing a total flip around, turning into someone that I didn't know anymore. He started saying that he was seeing things, but they weren't there. The final straw was when he started coming after me with a shovel. He was then sure that I was somebody else. Well, whatever dark medicine she used ended up working because my boyfriend lost his mind and I ended up leaving him. Thinking about it still scares me. I did end up leaving the rest. I do get calls from him and he seems all right, but we're not together anymore. Like I said before, not Danae. I'm not exactly sure what goes on out there in the Navajo Nation, in those places. I do have other friends who are also Dene, and they have given me different explanations as to what happened, and I have determined that either one or the other thing happened. One, it actually was witchcraft, native love medicine, something along those lines, something that works its way into the mind, into the spirit, and it causes the victim to go crazy, almost like that person is possessed. I even heard enough stories from different tribes to know it's not just superstition. When people mess with love medicine, it can twist someone's mind and ruin people's lives. Or two, something even worse, that my ex, and maybe even his family, were all involved in something much bigger. Then I realized that maybe they weren't just victims of this woman. Maybe they were working with her, or that it was tied into something darker, that they were all trying to hide from me. Either way, after what I lived through, after what I saw with my own eyes. So I hope now you understand me, why I don't just let anyone into my home, not even family, not even old friends. My home is sacred. It's my protection, my peace. And not everyone who comes inside has good intentions. Once you have lived through something like I did, you learn real fast. Not every visitor is just a visitor. When I was 22, I ran a bus route in Flagstaff, Arizona near the ski place. I ran it during the cold months of winter, and I often never picked up anyone up on my entire shift. I simply drove from stop to stop. Now, I gotta give you the legend of the Stick Woman. There are 2 reservations in Flagstaff, one the Navajo, the other the Hopi. This story comes from the Hopi tribe. The story goes that there's a Native American woman who is extremely skinny, so skinny that she would hide in bushes and just stare at you, and you would never see her because she was so thin as the branches themselves. Back to the story. I was driving in December of 2014, and I had about an hour left on my shift before I ended the night while driving to my next stop. I see this woman. She has a Native American blanket around her and is walking on a snow-covered sidewalk. This is very weird. If you've ever been to Flagstaff during the winter, you know it's very cold. On top of this, she is skinny. Like, simply skinny. I didn't think too much about it, but I was just worried about her freezing to death. So I pulled over next to the sidewalk. I opened the doors, and I told her to come in. I don't even have her pay the fee since she's very sickly looking. I just told her to lay down and get warm. She walks to the very back of the bus, you know, the area where it's kind of like a bed in the back, and then she just lays down. I don't think anything of it, and I continue my route, of course, picking up nobody. An hour passes, and she's still laying down in the back of the bus. At this point, I call her and tell her it's time to get off as my shift is going to end. She doesn't respond. I wait a bit more before calling to her again, but once again, she doesn't respond. I eventually have to pull over and walk to the back. I tap her gently. At this point, it's standard protocol to call the FPD, Flagstaff Police Department, and I tell him everything that was going on, and I also tell him that I have an unconscious person on my bus, and after a long time, 2 officers show up. I open the door and they walk to the back of the bus. They ask me to stay in the bus, driver's seat. They come back around 5 minutes later, looking a little nervous. They begin to ask me questions like, have I been drinking or if I hit anything? I answer no to all these questions and ask why they're asking me. One of the officers say it's because the lady doesn't have a pulse. Of course I freak out, but the officers just pull me off the bus and onto the sidewalk, and they have me stand there until the paramedics arrive. When they do, we're all standing out there and they go in and see if they can save her. The 2 paramedics come out and ask where the lady is. If I had just called the paramedics on my own, they would have never believed me. But even the officers insist that the lady was in the back of the bus, so they go back there, all 5 of us, and we discover she's no longer there. The only thing out of place is the Native American blanket on the ground. Now the officers had to bring my bus for investigation, and they took the recording from the bus. I never personally saw the video, but on my last day before moving down to Phoenix for a different job, I did ask my boss what became of this investigation, and he tells me that the video had her stand up while we were off the bus and open the window just a tiny crack and pull herself off the bus and onto the snow-covered sidewalk. I never saw her again. By looking up the story, I haven't been able to find any resources. Most people don't notice her. This event happened just south of Balaka, Arizona, within the Navajo reservation. A pair of skinwalkers, they say an old couple that lived deep back in the reservation, were seen lurking around this small cattle ranch. 2 heifers have disappeared recently, one of which was discovered down by the creek and mutilated. The man who owned the ranch, his 2 sons and his brother, themselves, and went out to try to run them off. One of the sons, not yet 18 years of age, was searching out beyond the barn when a dark shape, materializing from the darkness itself, loomed up in front of him, almost nose to nose. As the boy attempted to raise his rifle, the figure raised its hands up to its face as if it was going to yell something. The boy, trying not to look at it in the eyes, then felt something rush into his face like dust or sand. Even though he tried not to, he ended up taking a breath and some of it was inhaled in. Immediately things went dark, and he started experiencing hallucinations. The others found him only minutes later on his knees, holding the sides of his head and his eyes rolled back. He fell to the ground and went into some sort of trance. His body limped and he became unresponsive. They carried him back to the house and they summoned the local medicine man, who came and said some prayers over him. But he told the others there was nothing to be done but to wait for the dust traces of which were still on his face and his shirt to wear off. He promised he would come back the next day when the sun was up and bless the hogan. Later, after he had regained consciousness, the boy swore to the others that he was the victim of a dog. He described it as not quite as tall as he is, thin and scraggly with patches of mangy and dark hair, a canine snout only shorter than a dog's and with the smell of rotten eggs or worse. He said he doesn't recall anything more before passing out other than not being able to breathe and having no control over his own body. We live about 6 miles south of Farmington, up on top of a big bluff. It happens to be the same place where my father died in a car wreck a long time ago. It was summertime and my car was acting funny. It ended up breaking down because the radiator hose was cracked. I called my boyfriend at the time and I told him what happened. He told me to take it home and he was going to be right behind me. The sun was setting. It was overheating so it would go and stall out. I know it wasn't a good idea, but I didn't have a choice. Anyways, I made it up the hill finally and my boyfriend found me on the side of the road. It was about a mile from my dad's site. I didn't think too much of it. We ended up putting the kids in the truck and put the tow strap. We were ready to go. I got in my car, and that's when I saw somebody walk by the passenger window. How sometimes you see a shadow or movement from the corner of your eye. That's how this was. Thought my boyfriend was doing one last check around the car, so I got out to double check with him. When I did, he was getting into his truck. Now I'm creeped out. There was nobody else around here. I looked up and down the road, but nobody was walking. And creeped me the fuck out and then hurried back into my car, and my boyfriend was ready. At this point, I just wanted to get out of there ASAP. I told him a few days later after that, and he told me something weird. Well, strange, he said. That night, when he was towing the vehicle, he was seeing a bunch of lights around, more like small orbs out in the distance. He said they would turn off and then turn back on, almost like if somebody in the distance had a light. They were all floating around and some of them going across the road. I'm not sure what was going on. I know people always hitchhike on that road and it surprised me for sure. What if it was my dad? Does anybody know if spirits hang around, or they had their final moment? Told a few friends about this. One of them told me that somewhere along those highways towards Bloomfield, someone she knew was hitchhiking at night. The person was drinking with friends and they got into an argument and left. Decided to walk and it was a little chilly. This person started walking alongside the highway and soon caught up with another person. This person that was walking alongside the fence was tall and slender. Wearing a hoodie with hands in his pocket, with his head down, he wanted to walk with this other person, so he ran up to him and said, "Yo, do mind if we walk together?" He lifted his head and turned to him. He didn't have a face, just an empty space in the hoodie, got scared and ran back to the highway. The people he was partying with ended up catching up to him, and he ended up riding back with them. This is a good place as any to get this off my chest, so bear with me. It's long, but I have to talk about it with somebody, and I can't talk about it with Amanda. This happened last summer in 2013, and I still haven't convinced myself that it was some bizarre, drunken fever dream. Some background info first. Amanda is my best friend. I grew up in a booming neighborhood, and when we were kids, new houses were going up in development. On weekends, we liked to go snooping in the unfinished houses. We outgrew it because we realized that going around construction sites didn't make us badass. It just made us stupid kids. At some point after that realization, 3 or 4 years ago, some rich guy started construction on this really huge house at the ass end of the neighborhood. The foundation and frames were finished, and about half the walls were up when we were told that the investor just randomly put the project on hold. Everything was just kind of left where it was, like he was planning to pick it up again. It was a huge eyesore, but the homeowners didn't make a big deal out of it. Simply because the driveway is about a quarter-mile long, you can barely see it from the street. So anyways, last summer, Amanda and I are both 23. We're home from college for a summer break. We haven't seen each other in months and want to do something together before we head off again. I remember Amanda telling me that we should go snooping around, just like old times. It sounded like more fun than several barrels of monkeys, just like when we were kids. So we planned to camp out for the night at the house at the end of the street. We ended up packing some sleeping bags, flashlights, and a few bottles of wine. I know this was going to be a pretty good time. It wasn't a long walk from our starting point, our parents' house, but it was still further than we wanted to carry all of our stuff, so we took my car. It was kind of eerie when we first got there, late in the evening. We do live in a forested area, so most of the houses are surrounded by a bunch of trees, but the woods are pretty thick. And around this place, you can even see the main street from the bottom of the driveway. A long driveway, too. A bunch of construction equipment had been left behind as well. Lumber, bricks, tools. It would be a death trap in the dark. There was also this weird smell, coppery and also a little rotten. It wasn't very strong. And so we stopped noticing soon enough, though. We spent the rest of the day exploring the place, figuring out what room was what, and kind of wondering what kind of person would start a huge-ass project and then just drop it. So we set up a little campsite in what we think was going to be the living room. It was a huge open space with an amazing view of the stars. Never got very dark there, but there was also a big moon that night. We had a bright gas lantern, but since it was too hot for a fire and we weren't stupid enough to start a campfire in a lumber pile, we just started drinking, carrying on, and generally just having a good time. I was sitting with my back to the outside and Amanda was facing me when she just froze, mid-sentence, staring at something behind me. I twisted around just in time to see something moving just beyond the tree line. It was gone too quickly for me to get a good look at it, but when I caught it, my stomach flipped. It was big, and it looked sort of pale, and for some reason I stared for a little bit, tense as a spring, but nothing else happened. When I turned back around, Amanda had now gone white, and she looked like she had a locked jaw. "Did you see it?" she asked. "Yeah, I guess," I said. But I was coming down from the adrenaline spike and said that it was most likely just a neighbor's great dog. That dog got loose all the time, and we were also a little bit tipsy, so we really could have just imagined it. Amanda nodded and just relaxed a bit. We went back to our fun times, and we had pretty much forgotten about it by the time that we settled down and go to sleep. I ended up waking up about 3 o'clock in the morning. I had to use the bathroom. When I got up, I noticed that Amanda's sleeping bag was empty, so I figured that she had gone to use the bathroom as well. I ended up taking my flashlight and found the spot in what would have been the backyard, and I did my business. Amanda was still nowhere to be seen when I got back, which kinda struck me as weird, but I curled back up into my sleeping bag and I didn't think too much of it. I didn't fall asleep though, and after 10 minutes had passed, I did get a bit scared. She was either taking the mother of all shits or she had tripped and hurt herself on the construction equipment. Just in case, I got up and went to go look for her. Since only half the walls were in place, it didn't take me long to verify that she wasn't in the backyard area surrounding the house. I went back to the living room and started calling for her. I wasn't too worried about making noise. We were too far away to disturb any of the neighbors. I kept telling myself that she was most likely just goofing off, trying to freak me out, but it was working. "Amanda, this isn't funny. Where the fuck are you?" About that time I got this creepy feeling that something was very, very wrong. I noticed that weird metallic smell again, and I thought it was stronger. I traded my flashlight for the gas lantern, and I started slowly searching the house. There were only so many hiding spots in that place. I was only searching for a few minutes, but in that time the smell got at least twice as strong, many times worse. It had undertones of vomit, rotting meat. Between the smell, my missing friend, and my nerves, I was losing my mind and nearly shitting my pants. I ended up finding Amanda at the opposite end of the house in a room that we had decided earlier must be a spare bedroom. She was facing away from me, looking outside. For a second, I felt relieved. I had found her, but something kept me from answering that room. I stood outside the unfinished doorframe, and I just watched her for a bit. Her shoulders started shaking, only a little bit at first, but then very violently, almost like she was going to throw up. But she didn't make a sound. The smell was burning my nostrils at this point, and my animal instincts were going haywire. I couldn't just leave her, though. I ended up calling out to her very softly. That's when she turned, looking back. That's the wrong fucking word. Her body didn't move or twist at all. She just kinda rotated without actually moving, like she was on spinning platform or something. That's when some switch flipped off in my head, and I fucking booked it. My primal instinct screamed at me to run, and that's exactly what I did. I'm not sure how I made it back to the car. I only remember thinking, that's not your friend. I practically threw myself into the driver's seat, locked everything that I could, and I was looking for the keys that I had left on the floor when we got there, when all of a sudden, I saw movement in the house. That thing that looked like Amanda was hauling ass through the construction site, headed right to my car. I froze in pure panic. It slammed itself against the passenger side door and was tugging at the handle for a few seconds. Then it looked me dead in the eye. Quit fucking around. Let me in. Instantly, something inside of me relaxed, by about a micrometer at least. My primal fear gauge was still going wild, but it wasn't over Amanda. I knew this was my friend. I unlocked the door. She half climbed, half collapsed into the passenger seat, then slammed the door behind her. That's when I saw her arms. They were all bloody to the elbow, and she was holding them weird, like she was trying to cradle them against her chest without touching them to anything. I grabbed her wrist to get a better look. She whimpered in pain. The image of her wound still makes me sick to think about it. You know how carrots split when they dry out? That's what it made me. Think of on top of each arm. She would have bled out in no time if they had been on the underside. I didn't say anything. I just went to crank the car, but something made me pause. The smell was back, stronger and more rancid than ever. That's when I heard some heavy footsteps on the gravel outside with the moon being out. It was bright enough that we could see around the car. But there was nothing there. Everything was still. The footsteps continued, drawing closer and closer until they stopped right in front of the vehicle. Then they started again, moving around the back, coming up to the passenger door and stopping again. Nothing happened for about 30 seconds. Then something big slammed into the door, rocking the whole car. I think at this point we were too scared to scream. Quit fucking around. It was a voice, but at the same time, nothing like a voice. You know how it's always kinda creepy to hear a voice recording played backwards? Well, that's what this sounded like. It didn't say anything else. It just kept circling the car. Not sure how long it lasted. Amanda and I were sitting paralyzed while that thing stalked around us. I'm sorry to say that there isn't much of a climax. The footsteps eventually stopped. The smell faded, but I couldn't really tell you when. It was at dawn when I finally made myself start the car. I took Amanda straight to the hospital. She started crying on the way, but we also didn't say anything to each other. When the hospital staff was asking what happened, it was Amanda who answered, and she said she tripped and cut herself on the equipment at the construction site. She ended up getting stitches, and by a miracle, there wasn't any permanent damage. We never talked about what happened that night. Whenever I do try to bring it up or ask her what happened, she just ends up staying quiet. If I know one thing about Amanda, it's that there's no way to make her do something that she doesn't want to do. Someone actually finished that house now. A chiropractor and his daughters live there. My parents ended up going to their housewarming party, but there's no fucking way I'm ever going inside or near that house again. Don't carry fear with you. The spirits will notice, and they feed off of this. Back in 2009, I worked for the Catholic Church at St. Stephen's Indian Mission in Wyoming. Now, to understand what happened, you have to understand the place. St. Stephen's Mission is older than the state of Wyoming itself. It was built back in 1886. Over the years, buildings were added, torn down, rebuilt. In 1926, the original building, which held the boy storm, the gym, and also the church hall, then won. It burned down. When they rebuilt it, The church went back up in the same spot, but the boys' dorm and the gym were moved northwest of where they originally stood. There's a lot of history. By 2009, I was working at the Father Al Keogh Gym built in 1950. The Keogh Gym is listed as one of the most haunted places in Wyoming. Most people talk about experiences in that building. The rest of the mission buildings are closed to the public, so not many people get to see what goes on in those. It was my turn to clean the gym and the classrooms that night. I had just finished the lobby, dumped the mop, took out the trash, and I started my final walkthrough to make sure all the doors and windows were locked. The gym floor lights were already off. The only thing left on was the security light that was mounted on the north wall. Without it, the gym goes completely dark. I then walked to the back control panel to turn that light off. I hung up the mop. I pushed the mop out into the broom closet, and I closed the door. I was standing there, hand near the switch. When I looked towards the center court, there was a boy standing there. He looked about 10, maybe 12 years old. He was holding a basketball. If anything, he looked real. But then he started running towards me as he crossed the court and stepped into the security light. He disappeared. There was nobody, nothing. What I remember the most is what he was wearing. Gym shorts and reversible tank top, the kind that we wore back in the 1960s. The Keogh Gym was built over where the boys' dorm and gym once stood. A lot of boys lived there, and a lot of history is underneath. In my life, I've seen so many things like this happen. And when you're afraid, that's when the spirits come bother you. I wasn't afraid at night. I just stood there, calm. I turned off the security light after that, and I finished locking up. The best advice I can give anybody is that anybody who feels uneasy in places like this to smudge, cleanse yourself, and don't carry fear with you. St. Stephen's Mission is haunted. Every building there has its own story. Most people only experience things in the Keogh Gym because that's what's open to the public. But the rest of the buildings, I have seen and experienced more things there, and sometimes evil, but as long as you don't show fear, you'll be fine. Maybe it's easy for me to say because I'm old now, but like I said, don't carry fear with you. Have you heard about the owl witches? Las Lechuzas. It's a witch or shapeshifter according to the Mexicanos and natives in Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico. I'm an old man now, but this happened back in the 1950s. I was raised in a little town right outside of San Antonio, Texas. I remember as a kid living out in the country, in the wilderness, and there were these horrible things at night that would land right on top of our little house. You could also hear them walking on the roof back and forth. These things were as big as the size of a human, but they also looked like birds, but they were hideous. And again, this was back in the early 50s. I remember seeing one of these things up close late one evening, and my grandpa was like, "Don't look at them, mijo. They will take notice of that." The thing was standing on a tree. It was the ugliest thing I ever seen face to face in my life. Sometimes at night, you could hear them up in a tree next to our home, but you could never understand the word of what they were saying. It was weird. Sometimes there wasn't just one of them. It was 5 or 6. This went on for a few days. And during that time, my grandparents said to not go outside at night, and that if I hear one, just ignore it. Even if it sounds like one of us, do not pay attention to it. They said it was dangerous, but they never told me what they could do to you or what can happen. Now this is a very weird case, because it happened during the day. It must have been a curse. This happened down in Eagle Pass. I was around 15. We went to the border town to visit family. I overheard my tias, abuelita, and mom talking about my tia Eva's recent divorce, how they believe her ex-husband had put a curse on her. She found a jar of dirt underneath her bed. She talked about how she would hear scratching on her bedroom window at midnight. Every night after they broke up, they talked about how it had to be a lechuza. Thought they were trippin', laughed it off. Later that night, my cousin showed up. We decided to hang out in the backyard. As we were listening to music and talking, I was talking shit about how our whole family are so superstitious and crazy. Then out of nowhere, we heard the most eerie screech. We didn't even turn around to see where it came from. Our scary asses ran straight inside our tia's house, with fear on our faces and in our voices. We all said that this damn lechuza was outside. All of the women in the house, including abuelita, went straight to the backyard and started cursing and shining lights at the bird. I don't take this shit lightly anymore. It turns out my tia's ex did hire a bruja to curse her through the help of some other bruja, a white witch. My family is Catholic, yet they still visit white witches to help with whatever it is that they need. I think it's a ripoff, to be honest. It doesn't make sense to other folks when I try to explain it. Whatever helps people sleep at night, I guess. By the way, I don't trust these brujas or brujos. I believe most of them just want our money. I grew up near the reservation. I also have 2 family members that are Navajo. There are some creepy things out there for sure. I felt things, and I heard a lot of stories from my brothers. One thing that happened to me as a teenager was super creepy. We were driving through the rest to get to Colorado for a concert. Out in the middle of nowhere, we saw an old woman walking on the side of the road. She was traditional Navajo denier, with a velvet skirt and her hair tied with a cotton string. I remember thinking it was a little weird that she was in the middle of nowhere, and no houses were around, and that she was elderly. She looked at us as we drove past her. About 20 miles later, we saw her again, and she looked at us, and it was the same lady. It did creep all of us out. It might be possible that she had a twin or something, but I'm good with faces, and it was the same woman. I do wonder what would have happened if we had stopped. All I know is that when you see somebody twice, it means something. Like either someone is trying to draw you, like when you see the same dog or person twice. It might seem wrong that we didn't stop and actually offer her a ride, but growing up around the area, we knew it wouldn't have been appropriate. Plus, our car was full. She didn't look like she was in distress or anything, and when we saw her again, none of us said anything for a while. We were all so creeped out. Her face was also blank, not friendly or unfriendly, just blank. I told my brother, he's my husband's half-brother and his half-Danian, and he said she was likely a spirit. I will add that he didn't think it was scary. He said that she was more of a guardian spirit. He is Navajo, and his father is very active in the tribe, and he was raised very traditional. All I know is that everybody in the reservation always says, if you see something that you're not supposed to see, you didn't see it. My boyfriend and I were staying in a tiny home in Navajo Nation, right across from Monument Valley in 2019 that was solar-powered. It was an Airbnb, and it was one of the last stops on a road trip through Colorado and Utah. There was an outhouse for a bathroom that you had to access by going outside. The area is very beautiful. The tiny home is on the cliffside, with a spreading view of all of Monument Valley. Behind it are also large red rock formations with hiking trails. There's also a few homes around, but very spread apart. It has a strong energy about it, and there were some petroglyphs on some of the rock formations around the tiny home. We arrived in the early afternoon and settled in. As night was falling, my boyfriend called his dad to tell him that we had arrived, and also to let him know where we were. His dad had some experience in Navajo Nation as he's come to the area before to do a sweat tent ceremony. And he told us he always fell off there, well, around the area that we were in. He then told us, watch out for those skinwalkers. And we had both not heard about them before, so we just laughed to ourselves about him being fearful over something unreal. We got off the phone and my boyfriend started looking up a skinwalker. After a few minutes, he looked over at me and said, well, the worst thing that happens is that we can die. And I kid you not, at that moment, all of the power in the cabin went out, completely. It was very dark, and this tiny hole had huge glass windows showing the whole interior. While earlier it was beautiful because it showed views of the landscape, now it seemed very scary, almost like walking into a portal into the unknown. So we were both scared of death, and of course, the only way to use the bathroom was to go outside, despite our efforts to contact the Airbnb owner, likely because of the late hour. Also, since we were only staying for the night, we decided it wasn't worth to make an argument. However, we both did sleep poorly that night. We tossed and turned, unable to find rest, and I swear, we would hear noises echoing outside. We didn't know what the noises were. We just ended up right next to each other, too afraid to even glance towards the windows for fear of what might be out there. We don't believe in the paranormal, which is why we laugh when my father-in-law said to watch out for skinwalkers. Thankfully, nothing happened from there. First light of dawn broke through the big-ass windows. We spent no time unpacking up our belongings, and I'll be honest, we didn't even bother brushing our teeth or using the bathroom again. We were just trying to get the fuck out of there as quickly as possible. However, as I was taking some stuff outside to the car, I saw a pack of feral horses standing right outside of our window. They weren't right next to the window, but they were across from it, and one of them felt like was staring into my soul. I went outside to take photos, and I felt like it was trying to lead me away back into the large red rocks. It truly felt like there was energy in that area, almost like it was reminding us that it was there, it's still alive, especially because we scoffed at it. Overall, was a really cool experience, but it was a bit humbling and a little scary as well. After we left, my boyfriend called his dad again, and I won't forget what he said at the end. He said, "Whatever you think it was, you didn't see it, and you don't talk about it. Don't give them power." Please tell me I'm not the only one who's lived by this rule on the rest. The one about don't play with cards on a Sunday. I always heard that when you play cards, you're playing with the devil. Personally, I don't like them. I don't like them in my house. That's just me, though. My great-grandma used to say, if you gamble on Sunday, the devil will get you Monday. Has anyone else heard something like this? Or has anyone else had something like this happen? You see, growing up, we always used to get together at my grandma's house for Easter, Christmas, you name it. There were so many of us that we as the kids would end up sleeping on the floor in the living room. Meanwhile, the adults would stay up late laughing, drinking, and playing cards for money. Every time that we got together, my grandma would repeat my great-grandma's words. Don't leave them playing cards out on the table when you're done, or the devil will come play with them. Some of the people would just laugh it off, you can say. You know how it goes. The games end late, and everyone went off to sleep. Me and a few cousins would now be able to finally go to sleep. We ended up setting our spots on the living room floor, and after a while, well, you get a bunch of cousins together, and they aren't going to go to sleep. But as we're talking laying down, we start to hear this fluttering sound. Like if the blinds are slapping lightly against the window, we figure someone left it cracked open, so we got up to make sure the window blinds were closed. Because you know, rest life. The spirits are lurking, looking to see who left the blinds or windows open. So we get up, but to our surprise, everything is closed. So we ended up going back to our quote-unquote sleeping beds, and at some point at night, I had to use the bathroom. So I got up to go. The good thing is that at this point we had one inside the house, not like other homes who still had to walk a certain distance outside. And as I did, I walked past the kitchen table where they were playing cards at. After I finished my business, I left the bathroom and I started to walk back to my bed. When I passed by the table, I kid you not, the playing cards, they weren't how I saw them earlier. This time they were scattered across the table like someone had shuffled them. Well, actually they were perfectly fanned out, with one card flipped over right in the middle, the Jack of Spades. I'm not sure if it was my eyes playing tricks on me, but it didn't look right. The face on the Jack wasn't normal. The features were twisted, almost grinning. The longer I stared at it, the more wrong it felt. I blinked and looked again, and I looked normal. Maybe my eyes were just playing tricks on me, so I ran back to the living room and told my cousins. They woke up panicking at this point, because apparently they were having some bad dreams. What a coincidence. All three of them. So we all bailed out on the floor setup, and we all ended up sleeping with our families that night. The next morning, one of my cousins, he was around 8 or 9, he said something that still makes my skin crawl. He said that he pulled a playing card out from underneath his pillow, and it was the same Jack of Spades. Well, we never figured out how it got there, and everything just sounds weird. Since that day, I don't mess with any playing cards, and if I'm ever around them, I make down sure that they're put away before the night falls. Because now, I don't think that my great-grandma was just being superstitious. Having to move into a new place can be a complicated process. You're basically uprooting your entire life and adjusting to your new surroundings. The finances and planning that go into such an endeavor can also be quite stressing if you're not ready, which is what happened with my situation. I had recently finished college and was currently staying with my parents. Not an ideal situation, but my mother invited me to stay as long as I provided some sort of rent. I had been staying home for roughly a year, and towards the latter months I had been searching for a new place that didn't have my parents hanging around at every turn. Towards the end of the year, my parents had informed me that they had just sold our house and were getting ready to move to the southern part of Florida. This took me by surprise as I wouldn't be able to go with them because of my work obligations. This made me find a new place to live as soon as possible. Just about all the apartment complexes in my area wouldn't have any vacancy for weeks or months, and most other places weren't even accepting applications. Getting concerned that my options becoming more limited by the day, a posting was submitted for a house on the other side of the city. It was a place for rent, and the owner didn't really seem that big on official procedures. They probably hadn't rented homes very often before. I reached out to them with my information, and they approved me only after a few days of speaking with me and reviewing my application. I exhaled a sigh of relief and was able to move in not long after. Thankfully, I don't own that much stuff, only about a bedroom's worth of belongings, so my moving costs remain fairly low. When I pulled up to the location, the renter was standing outside of the house. It was an older woman who had a deep southern accent. She was very nice and respectful. We walked throughout the house, and being honest, it wasn't much to write home about. It was a tiny single-story house with a built-in garage that could barely hold a bicycle, let alone an entire car. Overall, I was quite content with it, and the truth be told, I was just happy to have a place to live and not have to worry about moving anymore. As we approached the front door, something caught my attention. On the side of the door was what appeared to be a camera mounted into the wall. I asked the woman what this was exactly, and she mentioned that the previous owners of the house were concerned about home security, so they installed a security system throughout the house. She mentioned there being a camera at the back door as well. I was a bit surprised that someone would actually come out here for home security, given the house itself and the surrounding area. But I guess you can't really put a price on peace of mind, I thought. We finished the walkthrough and I signed all the required documents before moving into my new home. The owner also handed me a slip of paper with all the information about the security systems. It instructed me to download an app and log in to set everything up. That evening, after I had moved most of my things into the house, I lounged on my bed with my phone. I pulled up the security app and tapped through it. The interface was fairly clunky and difficult to use. It looked quite outdated compared to the newer, higher-end systems that people purchase. However, it did let me access both cameras, the one at my front door and the one at my back. I spent a few minutes looking around at my driveway before getting bored and just opening up a game. As the hours dragged on, I eventually found myself getting more and more tired before falling asleep with my phone in my hand. When I woke up in the morning, I was confused. For the first few seconds, I wasn't sure where I was. But after taking a moment, I realized where I was and sighed with relief. I grabbed my phone to check the time and was surprised to find a notification on my home screen. It was a notification from my security system that I had previously set up. It told me that someone had rung my doorbell a short time after I fell asleep. I thought this was odd, as I had fallen asleep late in the evening. I pulled up the app and I scrolled back to that time. They gave me a precise time for the ring, but the camera showed no one standing outside of my door. I scrolled back and forth for some minutes, before eventually giving up and beginning my day. A week after I had moved in, I was lounging in the living room on the cheap couch that my parents had gifted me, watching a bit of TV, with my phone vibrating in my pocket. I got my phone out to check to see who was texting me, but it was another security alert. This time, it said, "Motion detected." I opened the app and activated the camera. As the tiny feet came into view, I couldn't see anything. Then, I noticed something at the corner. Someone was standing in my driveway, but they weren't moving, just standing there near my car. I sighed and rose from my seat. I walked over to the door and opened it. I called out loud and with a stern voice, "Hello," but was quickly silenced as I didn't see anyone standing out there. My entire driveway was clear except for my car. I even stepped out and walked around my vehicle to make sure no one was hiding behind it. I then took a moment to look up and down the sidewalk, but I couldn't see anyone around. Scratching my head, I went back inside. There wasn't another incident like that for following 2 weeks. Then, towards the end of the first month of living there, something even stranger happened. I was in my room typing up some reports I missed at work so that I wouldn't have to get chewed down from my boss the following day, when my phone suddenly began vibrating along my desk. It was almost like I was receiving multiple text messages. I quickly grabbed my phone and flipped it over. There were numerous alerts from my security system going off every few seconds. There were motion alerts from both my front door and my back door. At first I figured the devices were messing up. That seemed to calm my mind, if only slightly. Still, I opened up the application to make sure it was just nothing. When I switched on the front door camera, I felt my heart drop. There was another shadow figure. This time, it was standing on the path leading towards my door. This might sound crazy, but it looked almost like a mummy wrapped out in black, and it was slowly moving towards the front door before stopping just shy of it. It then stepped into the light of my porch and brought its face inches away from the camera. It was shrouded, but the face that illuminated was deeply contorted. It grinned into the camera that sent chills through my body, and I felt as if it was looking directly into my eyes. It then took a few steps backward into the shadows and just stood there on the edge of the frame. I could feel my skin crawling as my heart was pumping out of my chest. That's when my phone vibrated in my hand, and I nearly dropped it as a result. Motion detected at back door. I fumbled through the app to swap the camera to the one facing my backyard. The way the camera at my back door is set up, it's mounted on the wall so I could see the entire back patio and door with a portion of the backyard itself. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, I noticed something that made my stomach drop and my body cease. My back door was open. I always set the alarm to go off right before I go to sleep, but since I was wide awake, I still hadn't done it. I quickly stood up and rushed over to my bedroom door, locking it in the process as I was facing my door for the briefest of seconds. I could have sworn I heard breathing coming from the other side, a rag, labor breathing, as if someone was pressing their face against the wood. The sound of a nail being scraped on the wood began to resonate throughout my room. Then, after a few minutes, the sound stopped. I just sat there against the wall, opposite of my door, trying to desperately rationalize the situation I was in. Before I knew it, hours had passed, and the sun was already cresting through my window, and I rose from my seat. Slowly I unlocked the door and pulled it open. The coast was clear. I have no idea where that thing came from or what it even wanted with me. All I know is that it's going to take some time for me to find a new place to live. In the meantime, I'm heading down to the store to buy a hammer, wood, and a lot of nails. At this point, I'm buying a gun as well. The Braki were haftadi. This happened to my mother, and I'm writing it with her permission, because she's 81 and doesn't do the internet, but she wants it recorded somewhere. My mother grew up in southwestern Virginia in the 1950s and spent a lot of time in the mountains as a girl, hiking, camping with her father and brothers. She was not, she wants me to emphasize, an impressionable person. She grew up in the mountains. She knew the mountains. She had no patience for ghost stories and spooky campfire talk, and still doesn't. When she was 16, she and her father and 2 brothers went on a camping trip into the Jefferson National Forest, a 3-day thing. And on the second night, something happened that she hasn't talked about to most people and has thought about for 65 years. She was in her sleeping bag, the men and theirs, their tent on a flat spot beside a creek. She woke in the middle of the night and needed to use the bathroom, which was just the woods. And she slipped out of the tent quietly so as not to wake anyone and went a little ways from camp into the trees. When she was coming back, she saw a light. Not a flashlight, not lantern light, not any kind of light she'd seen before. A soft blue-white glow, about the size of a basketball, hovering above the creek, 30 feet from camp. Just above the surface of the water, she said, the way the reflected moonlight sits on a stream. Except there was no moon that night, and this was 3 feet off the surface. It was moving. Not drifting, moving, with the deliberate quality of something that knew where it was going, following the creek upstream, slow and steady. She stood at the edge of the trees and watched it until it was out of sight or on the bend. Then she went back to her sleeping bag and lay awake until dawn. In the morning, she told her father, who listened without expression, and then told her that the old people called them something she doesn't remember the exact word for, and that they were seen now and then on the creeks, and that you watched them and you did not follow them. He said the old people knew what they were, but that the knowing had mostly been lost, and what was left was just the rule. Watch. Don't follow. He said his own father had seen one on the same creek 50 years before. He said it like it was a piece of local information, the way he'd tell her which trails were washed out or where the best fishing holes were. My mother says she has never forgotten the light, and never will. She says it was one of the most beautiful things she ever saw, actually, that there was something about the quality of it that was not frightening at all, just completely outside of anything she had a name for. She says the only unsettling thing was not the light itself, but the rule, the watch don't follow, and the knowledge that the rule existed because somewhere in the history of people who lived near these creeks, someone had followed one. I asked my mother the last time I visited her whether she'd ever told anyone else this story in 65 years. She said she'd told my father, who believed her completely and had told her about a similar light he'd heard about from his own grandfather in the mountains of eastern Tennessee, which told us both something about how widespread the knowledge of these lights was in the generations that lived closest to these creeks. She said she'd once mentioned it at a church gathering carefully, describing it as something she'd seen as a girl that she'd never been able to explain, and that two older women in the group had given each other a look, and then one of them had said quietly that she'd seen one too as a child, and that the rule about not following was a rule she'd been given by her own mother. 3 women in a church hall who'd all seen the light on the creek and all had the same rule, and none of them had talked about it. And what my mother took from that was that this was not a rare thing, not a once-in-a-lifetime aberration, but something that had been seen by ordinary people in these mountains for generations and known about and passed down as a rule, and that the rule's existence was itself a piece of evidence that the light was real and had been real for a long time. She doesn't know what happened to the person who followed. Neither do I.